What do you make of the Prime Minister's speech? Are you ready to work with business groups in the government?
Well, I think we've shown that already throughout this whole pandemic, that the union movement's prepared to sit at the table, work with government, work with employers, work with anyone that understands that our role is about putting forward what's in the best interest of working people, which is often what's in the best interest of the whole community and the economy. I was just listening to the New South Wales Premier, and I'm shocked by that. That decision really does fly in the face of the very amazingly good work that the public sector in all states has done. But to think that health workers, nurses, firefighters, police, ambos, and the thousands of other workers are being thanked by getting a pay freeze is a terrible decision of the New South Wales Premier there. But back to the Prime Minister's point, I think that what we need to do now is actually sit at the table. We'll be arguing that what's important for working people is job security and making sure that they get a fair share of the nation's wealth.
Just on that New South Wales announcement, the Premier's argument was that that extra money that would go to those pay increases could be channelled back into frontline services for essential equipment support like that. You don't agree that that would be good?
Well, of course I agree that there needs to be extra money spent in terms of frontline services, but not at the expense of taking money out of the pay packets of the very people who've got us through this crisis. That's a false economy, because if you freeze wages, then that is going to be bad for small business, bad for the economy as a whole, because everything we can do that now adds to stimulus, that adds to the capacity of households to actually spend, will be in the interest of saving thousands of more jobs. So I think she's got the fundamentals wrong. And it really is an insult to those people who've done all of the hard work to get us through here.
Every state and territory, though, would be bracing for a decrease in funding. They're not going to be making as much money off things like land tax or stamp duty if housing isn't going at the same rate it was before. So they are going to have a huge hit to their revenue. What would you say if they just simply said they couldn't afford it?
Well, I think that we've got to think about the medium to long term here. At the moment, there's a capacity to spend that is actually going to, in the long term, save state and federal government money, because if they make the mistake of battening down the hatches now and not adding money into the economy, then it will have a worse impact on the economy. It won't save jobs. It'll actually cause more unemployment and the economy to suffer for a lot longer period of time. We know this from our history, that what's needed now is for governments to actually put their hands in their pockets and spend, because that will be what will support people in employment, what allows people to make sure that they're still spending, and that means that we'll get through this without a long-term depression. That is the very real risk if we don't have stimulus in the economy. And making sure workers have money to spend and have jobs is the most important thing you can do.
If we return to that federal push from the government about this IR compact, with unions sitting down with business leaders, government, to find consensus on these essential issues that the Prime Minister said need to be resolved to stimulate the economy again, I did find it really interesting that he said that he hopes these working groups find a consensus, but it isn't necessarily going to change what happens at the end, that they do want to move forward and they will do that regardless of whether a consensus is reached or not. What do you make of that approach?
Well, I suppose the Prime Minister's wanting it a bit both ways, and I understand the politics of that, but what we will say is this, is that you get better decisions if you have the voice of working people at the table as well as the voice of business. And you end up with a result that has much, that's a better quality result and is more long lasting. If the Prime Minister and the government decides to not listen to the points of view that we'll put forward, really our job is to have the back of workers, and that's what we'll be in there doing, making sure that the changes that happen don't take them backwards, but put them in a position where they've got good, secure jobs going forward and they're getting their fair share. If that doesn't happen, and if there's not agreement reached and the government decides to proceed with changes that we think are bad for workers and bad for their families and communities, then we'll oppose them and we'll fight them. But we hope that's not where it ends. We're putting all of our best effort and good faith into having the discussion and hoping that the government's going to listen to what we put forward.
Of the 5 working groups, they all address pretty different issues, some enterprise bargaining agreements, some solutions for casual workers, greenfields agreements. Which working group are you the most focused on? Which do you think is going to need the most work?
Oh, look, I really do think all 5 are important. I wouldn't pick one and say one's more important than the other. We can see that for working people, it's essential that, for example, we deal with things like wage theft. Well before this pandemic, we had a problem that every single day people would have heard. There was another example of companies, big and small, who had been caught out not paying workers their legal minimum, and that's unacceptable. So that's something where we really want to see a practical solution which stops wage theft, but also means workers can quickly get their money back when that's happened. We're also really interested in this point about how we make sure that that there's not a false idea of what casual work is. Part of what's happened is that people use the title casual for jobs that are actually ongoing, really permanent jobs. And that's not in anyone's interest, because if your job is regular and keeps going, then you should have the benefits of being treated as a permanent worker. And that's good for the business that you work for, as well as good for the workers. So we want to address that. But as I said, I don't think that we could put a list and say this working group is more important than the other. We're committed to playing our part in all 5 of them and trying to find good practical solutions that are going to help working people.